Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Lance. Tim is in the field right now, so I am flying solo here for this introduction and for this interview with a very special guest as we continue our coverage on the cultural phenomenon involving the possibility of an active serial killer here in New England. And the guest today is the great Dr. Michael Arntfield. He is a criminologist, an author, a consultant, an award-winning professor at Western University in Canada. Dr. Arntfield spent more than 15 years as a police officer and detective in London, Ontario. He is now the founder and director of the Western University Cold Case Society and both an academic and investigative advisor with the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases. He's also on the board of directors for the Murder Accountability Project. And if you want to learn more about him and all of the work that he's done, the website addresses and his social media links are in the show notes. So in this conversation, Mike brings his unique and specialized insight into not only the dynamics of how the discovery of multiple bodies in a centralized location can be determined or excluded to be the work of a serial killer, but also into the psyche of the people and the organizations, be it mainstream media or social media, these organizations that in fact promote a particular narrative, creating their own reality. I'm going to say what Mike says towards the end of this upcoming conversation, just so listeners can hear it right at the top here as well. He asks an important question. That is, quote, whose truth does true crime convey? End quote. And when you listen to this conversation, that question will make a lot more sense, and perhaps we can even pick up some answers along the way. I do joke at the end of this conversation and say that I actually have more questions after hearing some of his insight, but not in a bad way, in a good way. Now, before we get to the conversation with Mike, I want to go through the timeline of when these bodies were discovered. Most of these names you can find online in news articles. I'm only going to mention certain names here, names that have been directly connected to a victim, and I'm doing this because it is not our intent on this show to link these particular names to a serial killer. The circumstances surrounding the discovery of these bodies and the conditions in which these bodies were found in vary wildly, so there's no connection that we know of to a serial killer, so we'll do our best to not connect these names to any serial killer rumors. On March 6, 2025, the remains of a woman were found near Norwalk, Connecticut by the Norwalk Police Scuba Team and the Fire and Rescue Team. Authorities located clothing and personal items left on the bank of the Norwalk River before eventually discovering her body. Also on March 6, unidentified remains were located by a hunter in a wooded area in Plymouth, Massachusetts. As of this time, there is no information on the gender, age, or cause of death. On March 19th, 2025, the remains of Suzanne Wormser were located near a cemetery in Groton, Connecticut. There are a couple of updates on this one. Donald Koffel has been charged with her murder. And a further update on that, Donald Koffel has died while in custody. He died on Friday, May 9th, while being held at the Corrigan Correctional Center in Connecticut. And this is according to the Connecticut Department of Correction. His death, they say, remains a mystery, but also to emphasize it is not considered suspicious. Koffel had been previously diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing treatment at L&M Hospital. So an additional update there on the story behind Suzanne Wormser's body, which was located near a cemetery in Groton, Connecticut. On March 20th, 2025, the remains of a missing New Haven mother were found by residents in a wooded area behind a house while clearing some brush. On March 25th, a body was found in Taunton, Massachusetts. The individual was identified as a male, 51 years old, and authorities said his death hasn't been deemed suspicious. On March 26, 2025, the remains of a woman were located. The family believes her death is suspicious, but the family is adamant that she is not the victim of a serial killer. On March 9, 2025, unidentified human remains were located in Killingly, Connecticut. There is no information on gender, age, or cause of death. On April 22nd, a 45-year-old female body was found near a bike path in Springfield, Massachusetts. This death is being investigated as a homicide, but no cause of death has been determined. On April 25th, 2025, two men's bodies were found in Salem, Massachusetts. At the time of this episode, an unhoused man is in custody for committing these two murders. On April 30th, the remains of a 39-year-old man were found in a construction site in Taunton, Massachusetts. The district attorney said that the man died, quote, as a result of a gunshot wound, end quote. On May 7th, 2025, the murdered remains of 35-year-old Nasha Mendez were found at the Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven, Connecticut. Edwin Arroyo Roman of New Haven was charged with Mendez's murder as well as tampering with evidence. Arroyo Roman not only confessed to Mendez's murder, but he also confessed to 3 murders in Puerto Rico. And Tim and I will continue to provide coverage on this story as relevant details are released or as any updates happen. One quick piece of housekeeping here. Happy to announce that on June 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we will be hosting a Private Investigations for the Missing virtual fundraiser. We have some great guests that are lined up. That list is growing as well. You can join us on our Missing Podcast YouTube channel, and that is at Missing CSM. On YouTube to join in. You can contribute, you can donate. Private Investigations for the Missing is a wonderful organization that Tim and I are proud to be on the board of. It was started by Bruce Maitland, the father of Brianna Maitland, who disappeared in March of 2004 in Montgomery, Vermont. And Bruce started this nonprofit to help families who are in similar situations as his own when a loved one goes missing, and law enforcement has dropped that story, that case from their priority list. Families and friends have to turn to someone, and this nonprofit offers licensed private investigators at no cost to the family to help them out in their search for loved ones. So it's a great cause. Again, we're proud to be on the board of it, and we're happy to be hosting a virtual fundraiser to keep this thing going. Please follow us on social at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. For those not on our subscription service, you're going to hear a couple of ad breaks before we return with Dr. Michael Arntfield.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Right, it's a pleasure to welcome back to the show Michael Arntfield. How are you, Michael?
Wonderful. Good to see you, Lance.
It's great to see you. Tim and I started looking into this phenomenon that's happening here in the region of New England a few weeks ago, and we started to report on it. At some point, Tim and I have to say to ourselves, hey, we're podcasters. We can't comment any further on a certain topic. We need to bring in a professional. So when this came up, we were like, we need to get Michael on the show to talk about this. But before we get into that, it's been a minute since you've been on, so maybe some listeners out there need a refresher on who you are. Can you just give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So Dr. Michael Arntfield, professor and criminologist at Western University, founder and director of the university's cold case research group, former police detective in Canada, director of the Murder Accountability Project in Washington, D.C., Fulbright Scholar at a number of U.S. universities, including Vanderbilt, author of 12 books on criminal investigations, and just finished, I think now, 18 seasons of true crime cable and streaming series, including season 2 of a show called Somebody's Hiding Something, which will be the next one out.
But you forgot to mention master multitasker and prioritizer. That's incredible. And I apologize, I didn't introduce you as doctor and professor. Isn't that funny? Like, you do so much that the doctor part slips my mind.
Yeah, it's just Mike at the end of the day. So that's all that matters.
All right. Well, Mike, we are here to talk about this incredible thing that's happening in New England. Bodies have been found over the course of a few weeks. After 3 or 4 were discovered within the same region, and within a week or two, this idea that a serial killer is now stalking this area of New England. So the New England serial killer has been the buzz phrase for a month or 2 months here. Tim and I started working on it. We started going through all of the identifications of the people who are found, who are listed in the public, and we couldn't find any real connection other than the geographic region. There was no connection as to the way they died, any sort of similarities other than they were all female, except for now male bodies are being found. So they're trying to shoehorn those in there as well. You've been looking into this as well. What's your initial thoughts on how this started, and when did it become like a thing on your radar?
So this is a really fascinating sociological phenomenon, regardless of how this ends in terms of any criminal investigation or legal outcome. really reminds me sort of at least for now, a miniaturized version of the smiley face killer case. So not the happy face killer, which is that Netflix series, but the officially unsolved and many would say really uncorroborated theory of a series of drownings across the US of college-age males under suspicious circumstances where a smiley face is found near the water, where either they went into the water or where the bodies were recovered. That's a really interesting case because you can find patterns in anything. And overwhelmingly, statistically speaking, in terms of the investigations, those cases have been explained as either accidental or undetermined. But you can put a lens on that, particularly when you're dealing with a large region, and say, well, there was no consistent investigative methodology because one was found in Wisconsin, one was found in Minnesota, different police departments, different methods, different levels of competence. So we can't say that, at least some of these aren't part of a pattern. So it's the same thing here. New England's believe it or not, a big area. You know that. Lots of different police jurisdictions, and they're handling these all very differently in terms of either information they're prepared to release or when there's an account of a body being found, whether that is by way of press release or that just gets leaked. Because otherwise, a body just being found as a result of a natural death, a suicide, or even an accident isn't necessarily going to be something the police are going to release. Certainly not without locating the next of kin. So we've got a constellation of unusual things happening here that I think is very easy for people to synthesize all that into a narrative of that these must be related. And you talked about a couple of the things that lend credence to such a theory. One, a number of female victims who appear to have nothing in common. Two, the bodies being found outside. So when you have females found dead outside, people immediately, particularly in the true crime milieu that we're in, think body dump. You think multiple females unrelated to each other. You think stranger attacks, multiple victims, multiple locations, outdoor disposals, must be a serial killer. Has all this sort of checks all the boxes, at least of serial killer as we think of in the conventional sense. So somebody who is either what we call a category 1 or category 2 serial offender. Category 1, this is a U.S. Justice Department, National Center for the Research of and Analysis of Violent Crime categorization. Type 1 or category 1 is an offender, typically targets a stranger, transports the victim and conceals them outdoors. So like in the woods, something like the Green River Killer might have done. And category 2 is somebody who targets a stranger, transports them, but just dumps them. They have certain, obviously, common characteristics, each of these offenders, things in common, sort of recurring demographic traits that allows, again, this is the origin of investigative analysis, or what was once called profiling, where you can start to say, okay, somebody who drives or transports and conceals, we know from the data, have things in common that differentiate them from someone who just drives and dumps. And they have a different relationship, obviously, to the victim, to the scene. So without necessarily knowing these classifications and this what we call offender taxonomy, people who watch true crime, read true crime, listen to true crime podcasts, they already know this stuff intuitively. So they think of, okay, we have females being found outside in numbers. The police are releasing or acknowledging these deaths, which suggests that, maybe they're not suicides. Suicides as a policy almost universally in the G7 are not reported on by law enforcement agencies unless there's some public interest in it or the media gets a hold of it because it's a person of public interest. Natural deaths are not reported on outside of death notices and obituaries. So why is it that police are acknowledging or reporting on these unless there is an active investigation that's in the public interest? So all the ingredients are there, but there's been no investigative updates. This also buys into the theory or allows people to buy into the theory in that there is, unfortunately, a rich history of law enforcement agencies, particularly interagency task forces. So if you have multiple agencies investigating connected crimes, particularly interstate investigations, they're going to be very reluctant to admit that there's a serial killer. So this isn't something they're going to come out and say right away. And in fact, I've seen some media reporting that harkens back to the Boston Strangler case, which remains very infamous. New England, specifically Massachusetts, serial killer, where actually the opposite happened. They were very quick to label this a serial killer and release too much information to the public, to the extent that now really the criminological theory is that it was Boston Stranglers, plural, and that people got it in their mind that They were very excited by this very specific MO and signature that was released to the public, what would have been normally known as holdback information, so information held back for investigative reasons, and that there was copycats. And that, well, DeSalvo, who history now deems to be the Boston Strangler because he's the DNA match. There's a DNA match to the final known victim. He likely wasn't the only one responsible for what are anywhere between 8 and 12 deaths, depending on how rigorously you want to catalog them. So that was a bit of a rant, but I think that sums up what we're dealing with right now. And this is one of those things that is neither verifiable nor falsifiable. You cannot disprove that this isn't the work of a serial killer currently, but you also can't prove it. And it's nothing more than conjecture that I think has gained massive traction and momentum as a result of social media, which we've seen it with cases before the courts. Social media decided in a world of trial by Netflix that the Menendez brothers should get a resentencing hearing. And social media by decree has decided that New England has a serial killer. But I'm not sure either of those things are good ideas.
The social media aspect of it has to come into the perspective of law enforcement when the bodies are being found, right? And the Boston Strangler comparison that you made is really good because what they did, like you said, was release too much information. For whatever reason, they released too much information, and that was not the right thing to do. And now, over the past 15 years, 10 years, I'd say law enforcement knows that social media can have an impact on a developing investigation. At what point, in your opinion, did that happen in this particular case? Like after the first victim, the second victim, when did they start looking at social media and saying, this is getting out of control, now we have to figure out a way to deal with this? How does that impact their investigation?
That's a good question. I'm not sure you can pinpoint an exact inflection point where this then pivoted to become, a purported serial killer investigation. Police aren't saying it's a serial killer investigation. Some agencies have said that this, tone it down. But again, in an information vacuum, people will fill that vacuum with the narrative that they want. I mean, certainly it's widely accepted, and whether or not the body politic of Facebook and Instagram followed this in this case, but 2 or more victims that are connected is widely regarded as the threshold that you can classify a case as a serial killer investigation. Officially speaking, the U.S. code that governs the FBI's involvement in serial killer investigations still says that there needs to be 3 or more victims with compelling similarities to suggest that it's a serial killer. But that's strictly a bureaucratic designation to warrant the involvement of the FBI if they're wanted. Criminologists and most police officers would say, you've got 2 or more victims, we're not going to wait for the federal definition of a 3rd victim to drop before we start investigating this as a pattern. So my guess is around that same time. Can we put a date on it? No. I mean, that's the problem with this type of amorphous sort of, I don't want to call it an urban legend, but this is how urban legends start. Really, I think it's up to the police here to clear the air. I can think of some really bad examples. So near where I am in Toronto several years ago, and I appeared in a documentary on this. There's a serial killer named Bruce MacArthur. He's now convicted. We'll never know how many victims he had, but the chief of police in Toronto at the time, when there's a number of disappearances of men in the Toronto gay village, never seen again, like just up and vanished. A number of men. You can look up this case. Chief of police stood in front of a bank of mics at a press conference, said, there's no active serial killer in the city of Toronto. At exactly the same time that press conference was going on, police had Bruce MacArthur under surveillance and broke down the door to his apartment while he had his next victim literally chained to his bed. Out of the movies, they saved this guy's life. They already had him under surveillance for weeks. They had surreptitiously entered his apartment, downloaded, imaged his hard drive, knew that he had. Anyways, long story short, he was a necrophile, dismembered all these men, and he was a gardener, and he buried the dismembered remains in a series of plants at high-end properties that he basically was tasked with overseeing. This investigation was going on actively, and either was not known to the chief or it was suppressed. This is very recent history. We talk about the Boston Strangler. I mean, that's 60 years ago. This is like 10 years ago. And so mistakes do happen. Investigations can be ongoing, and the police public information officer or chief will say something to the opposite, either strategically or just because they don't know. So just because police are saying these aren't related, especially when you're dealing with multiple agencies, we don't know. So somebody, as this gains momentum, has to go on the record on behalf of these various agencies and say, like, we are actively investigating this. We don't know what it is. Bear with us. Or we can rule out definitively that this is even criminal. We don't know it's criminal. But again, multiple females found outside, strange. And where there's strange things happen, people will, like I said, in an information vacuum, fill in the blanks.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
You had said that it is up to police to clear the air, and I'm wondering how police can clear the air, and that's kind of what you were getting at right there. How can they clear the air and simultaneously manage the headlines? Because they could come out, and they've said this before. We've read articles where certain law enforcement members have been quoted as saying, we need to pump the brakes on this. We need to pump the brakes on the serial killer rumors. And the headline turns into X person addresses serial killer rumors.
Yeah.
There's also the former FBI investigator Scott Duffy, who says that authorities have not released enough information to squash these rumors. So how can they do that? How can they? I feel like they need to like shake the like journalists or something and be like, stop putting out these sensationalistic headlines.
Yeah, and Mr. Duffy I concur. This has become a runaway story that at some point there needs to be an unimpeachable, unequivocal answer as to what is going on. Because this is, again, multiple jurisdictions. This is affecting collaterally multiple police departments and investigators. And if one of these is, say, what we call an undetermined death, so cause of death and manner of death are two different things. Manner of death, you're limited to really only 5. So homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined, which is you can't necessarily make a determination, at least initially, on the manner of death. They could have fallen down. They could have been pushed down the stairs. Those are complex investigations. And if people are saying, oh, this is part of a serial killer pattern, that's going to affect the ability of those investigators, whether they be police investigators or medical investigators, to get objective data from witnesses who are maybe hearing about this and don't want to be involved, or have already made up their mind about what they think happened to this person and why they were in the woods on that day. So there are real implications when these things get out of control like this. So this is, like I said, regardless of its eventual legal legacy, is a sociological phenomenon that I think will be studied in years to come, much like, and here's another case from the annals of crime history, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Illinois.
Oh, yeah.
So just in a nutshell, there's a bunch of theories about what happened, but the thought was someone was releasing some kind of toxic gas into homes to poison people. And then everybody was claiming that they had either seen this person, that they were a victim as well. I mean, one of the cases was somebody was allegedly overcome with the fumes of what was ultimately determined to be their own nail polish remover. And there's a huge criminal investigation into this, that this was, the theory was somebody who had absconded with some mustard gas, maybe from World War I, and was deploying it into homes to terrorize this small community. It was all just a self-perpetuating urban legend. A lot of resources used at the same time. I compare it all the time to the anthrax mailings of 2001. I was a street cop at the time, and every single day, somebody thought they were getting an anthrax letter because they saw it in the news. So now every letter contained anthrax, or people were finding anthrax in their house with no self-awareness that, okay, no one actually knows you exist. I'm not sure they're going to synthesize anthrax spores and mail them to you. So this is what people do. I'm hoping that this is all for naught, but it's going to take somebody to shut this down. And it's for the reason it was never properly. There was no united front in the Smiley Face deaths case to say, no, these are not related. And there was enough retired law enforcement that wanted to get in on the action and be on television series who said, oh, in our opinion, these are connected, these are homicides. So it was just there's too much confusion. It was just an omnidirectional narrative. And that's why people are still talking about that. And my fear is that if these aren't criminal homicides, that these people maybe unfortunately took their own lives or dead in accidents will just all be cobbled together as part of a story that ultimately becomes urban legend, and that didn't really need to be. And it's going to take somebody to come out and, I think, set the record straight on that. Who that person is, I don't have an answer to that question. But this is, again, when task forces carry a lot of gravitas. So put together a task force, if these are multiple agencies, and say, we've investigated them, we've had our findings, double checked and peer reviewed. There's no reason to believe, there's no evidence to say that these are connected and that these are criminal occurrences.
We've seen law enforcement put together task force before when there have been very obvious connections between victims, and these bodies that have been discovered have like a certain hallmark or a certain like calling card that would suggest it's the same person. And in your opinion, this might be kind of a tough question to answer, what's the difference between what's happening in New England and what it would actually look like if it was?
Well, you'd like to think, at least in the United States, where law enforcement play ball with the press, accredited media at least, and rely on the public as their eyes and ears as they should, that they'd be very forthcoming. I mean, if you think of Delphi, Indiana, that case is now resolved. But when the two girls were found dead in that case, police quickly, CCTV images, voice print recordings. The one girl had recorded the man's voice. There's constant updates until they really started getting a suspect, and then they sort of went quiet because they didn't want to jeopardize that. Again, University of Idaho, constant updates. The case is constantly in the public eye. Public's continuously engaged. You would expect the same thing in this case. I mean, if these are connected and they're recurring, and I'm not saying this is the case, but hypothetically, if these are connected, they're criminal occurrences and it's recurring and there's nobody in custody, there's an existential ongoing public safety issue that police are then mandated to address by saying, avoid these areas. This is maybe who we're looking for. There'd be something, but there's nothing. Given the number of agencies involved in the age we live in, I think if there was something, you'd have one of the agencies want to get in front of this and say, yeah, you know what, we're going to engage the public. We're going to say what we're dealing with, or there'd at least be a leak. Again, is stock in trade for high profile criminal investigations across America. I mean, compared to other countries, I mean, a B-list celebrity gets arrested for a DUI and the mugshots on the internet within an hour. Like that wasn't released to the public. Like the press got that. So there is that whole underground economy in parts of the United States that I would expect would be buzzing with this, and they're not. There's no meat on the bone yet. And I think by now there would be if there was something here.
And you being an expert in these clusters of victims found, do you consider this an area that would qualify as small enough or large enough or the right size to be a cluster? Because I've made this point probably very awkwardly, and that a couple of bodies were found in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts. It has one of the highest crime rates in Massachusetts, if not the highest. But then you have an area that is more of a coastal town, like an area on the Cape, low crime rate. So how do you cluster these? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, bear in mind that the FBI's Highway Serial Killing Initiative, which is a task force or focus group, if you will, that looks at interstate related homicides, has clusters across the United States. Like the thought being that these are long haul truckers, and there's a body in Oklahoma linked to bodies in Tennessee and to Louisiana. So, I mean, you're talking massive geographic distances and clusters that aren't contained really to a single city, county, or even state. We need to start thinking about clusters differently when we're dealing with mobile offenders. And that's why I'm really interested to see with the Long Island serial killer, who is a classic example, allegedly, of a commuter killer. So somebody who lives in one jurisdiction, kills in another, disposes in another, or just travels to kill, essentially. So Israel Keys would be another case that your listeners would be interested in looking at. Somebody who turned serial homicide into a hobby and had kill kits stashed all over the United States. He'd fly to a random city, rent a car, dig up the kill kit that he'd buried a year earlier, and just go looking for people to kill. And he'd be back on the plane before the body would be found, if it even was found. He's got 2 victims whose bodies were never found, at least. So, yes, this area would qualify as if these are connected in terms of the psychogeography of offenders, so how offenders choose where they kill, where they dump, where they target, how they operate, in terms of their spatial environment, this would certainly qualify as actually well within a geographic cluster, never mind that clusters, again, are linked by modus operandi and by signature, so and by victim type. So you could have a cluster that spans many states. Those would be harder to put together, or I think in the traditional sense, you think of clusters as contained to cities or counties or regions. And in this case, yes, this was certainly qualified. And I'm not putting too fine a point on the fact that, two are in Springfield, which, as you said, there's a lot of smaller towns in the United States that people are unaware, like per capita, have crime rates that are greater than LA or Detroit. So yes, two in that city isn't necessarily unusual. One in a more bucolic setting is unusual. Are they all connected? Again, someone's going to have to come out and definitively say they are or they aren't.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Getting back to the task force that you'd mentioned, how does the communication start between the states in New England, and who becomes like the point person for each of the law enforcement agencies representing each state? Is that how it would work?
Well, there is no standard playbook when you're dealing with multiple states. I mean, ultimately, the state police should step in. Local law enforcement would often enlist the assistance of the state police that control the crime labs and have the resources to assist. If they are potentially connected, this is also where you get the FBI to assist. I can tell you from my work at the Murder Accountability Project, it's a quid pro quo with the FBI, however, in that typically, if they are going to assist, involves everything from providing training and allowing your officers to go on FBI courses to them coming in to assist with serial killer investigations, that agency needs to cooperate with the Uniform Crime Reporting Program and provide their data to the FBI for their sort of annual number crunching. So my guess is, I only mention that because my guess is, and we know this, that New England agencies typically have a high level of cooperation with the FBI. So they would avail themselves to assist in this case if they were needed. Again, the threshold being for that purpose, as I already mentioned, 3 or more victims, which we have in this case, if they are thought to be connected. So in that case, it's very simple in that the FBI would run point on it. And then obviously there would be local representatives on a task force of some kind. It's too early to say, but it would be nice to see if somebody coming out, again, speaking on behalf of everybody, whether that be the FBI, whether that be the head of an interstate task force, to say what they're dealing with and to legitimize this discussion. I think that's what that would do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's the other part of it, though, that I want to get your opinion on, which is this cultural phenomenon that's happening, the psychology behind people posting on social media. Tim and I have had a good laugh about some of these videos that have been on TikTok where it's this individual, particularly this woman who's in the middle of the woods, like on this trail, and the captions coming up about the serial killer prowling New England, and she's just looking around like she's in fear, like she's actually being followed. And initially we laugh at it, but then people take that seriously. And another quick note on that, I was getting my hair cut the other day, and my barber knows what I do with this true crime stuff. And he was like, have you been following this? And I said, well, we've covered it with a few episodes. And he was like, great. So he was going to listen to it. But he said to me, why do you think people want there to be a serial killer? And then he even said, speaking of himself, he was like, I kind of want there to be a serial killer.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do we want this to happen?
Well, it's the proverbial car wreck at the side of the road, right? People are fascinated by the macabre, by, things that would be frightening, but at a safe viewing distance are, just captivating. And people want to be a part of history, quite frankly. And then, that's what some of this is people trying to create history and document history. But this is really this behavior is synonymous with what I've called, and this is my last book, How to Solve a Cold Case, the fourth wave of true crime, which true crime has existed in some form really since the 1850s. It goes in cycles, and the current cycle that we're in is defined by the social media dimension and the fact that it's participatory. It's immersive true crime. So the closest you could get to that in the past, and the third wave would be like shows like Unsolved Mysteries, where you could call in a tip, or you could go on a walking tour of Whitechapel in East London, England, like, and walk the streets that Jack the Ripper walked. Whereas now you can actually create meta content. I mean, we've seen it again where people are influencing outcomes of investigations and of court processes. One way or it is impossible to disaggregate whatever happens with the Menendez brothers from those Netflix productions. And there are people languishing in jail who are actually innocent or who are actually over-sentenced, who don't have Netflix shows and will never see their day in court or be celebritized like those two. But those series were produced, people watch them, people comment on them, creates this entire like third column of content. And then, people with some influence get involved or are influenced themselves by it, between reality show celebrities to highly ideological activist DAs. And lo and behold, now we have a true crime production that, once it enters the echo chamber of social media, actually has demonstrable effects in the courtroom. It's insane. It's insane. And people would say, well, that's the democratic process. And that's, how, people vote with their keyboards and social media, I guess, once they learn the facts. But I guess the unanswerable question is, whose truth does true crime convey, right? Truth is, in realm of true crime, very subjective. It was originally, so you go back, the history of true crime is really interesting. If you go back, there's been an Edgar Award, so the Mystery Writers of America Award, literary award for what they used to call fact crime, going back to, I think, the 50s. So it has existed, like I said, in some form since the 1850s, and since the 1940s or 50s, there's been a recognized literary genre, but it was called fact crime because it had to be factually based, sourced, cited, corroborated. Now, true. It's not fact anymore. It's just true. And as we know, there's always two kinds of truth.
Wow, that's great. Whose truth does true crime convey? Yeah. And we're separating the truth from the fact, and that's so well put. That statement really put into perspective a lot of the questions that I know Tim and I have had about why this is happening. And people aren't looking for facts, they're looking for their own truth so that they can make that their reality, which is incredibly fascinating, like wildly more fascinating to me now after we've had this conversation. And in a good way, I'm leaving this conversation with more questions in my head that are so ambiguous,
You're right. People will find their own truth. And I mean, to go to all this trouble, I mean, there's something people are deriving from it. There's value people are deriving from it, whether that be money and monetization and material incentives, or whether that's something more cerebral and emotional and psycho. They want, like I said, a lot of people just want to be part of something so badly. And this is really, if you're living in that area, landed on your lap. And now you can, again, create a show about it, go out and live it. But they're absolutely getting something from it, given that's not nothing. So I think it's very easy to trivialize and infantilize true crime, and much of it deserves it. But at the same time, been around for 170 years in some form or another. We need to understand what it is that people are getting from it. And there's something significant there. I don't think we can just say that it's idle, mindless entertainment. And it exists along a massive spectrum, from idle, mindless entertainment that people still derive value from, to, I think, very important educational advocacy content. And I am very obviously discerning. I mentioned off the top, I mean, I appear as the expert and or host and or narrator in, 9 series, either currently in production or already on air and streaming. And I stand by I will not affiliate myself with anything that glorifies or lionizes offenders, that trivializes victims, that trivializes police. These are all shows that I think are important within this ecosystem. And it is an ecosystem.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It's been incredibly eye-opening. It's been everything that I wanted the conversation to be, and I look forward to you coming back on to talk about any one of your other projects that you have going on. Is there anything coming up for you that we should be looking out for, and something that we can get you on the show in the next few weeks to talk about?
I'll check release dates on coming shows, but again, Somebody's Hiding Something Season 2 out shortly. Season 1's on, I'm not sure where it airs in the US. It's on various streamers. To Catch a Killer now back on Tubi. Season 3 now, I think it's just on of Time to in various markets. It's Hours to Kill. In the United States, it's Time to Kill. And another cold case show focused on timelines and how timelines are so important. Really visually compelling shows. So. And my last book, How to Solve a Cold Case, is on Amazon or in most bookstores.
Cool. And probably in the meantime, you'll write 3 or 4 more books, and we'll have endless amounts of content.
I'm cooking up something now that in a year maybe I'll come back on. But it's I said I'd write no more books, but I always go back on my word. So.